What's up, you guys? So this little video will be on ER and IR verb conjugations. We just covered this a couple days ago in class. It's basically what we have been doing for the past, maybe 2 or 3 months now. It's just that we're doing a different ending, and we're doing an ER and an IR instead. Now I'm going to show you guys this little picture in a second and make it bigger. So conjugation, for the most part, just means changing the spelling of a verb to make it match whatever person you are connecting the verb to, like if someone is walking or if a lot of people are walking. It's always the same process. It doesn't matter if it's an AR verb, which is what we did, I want to say last chapter, if it's an ER verb, or if it's an IR verb, which is what you're going to see all three of right down here. The process is step 1, you take off the ending. So if it's an AR, ER, or IR, you take off those last 2 letters. Second step, add the new conjugation, which is what we usually put in those little charts, and you see a couple of them coming up right now, so we're going to see those too. So the thing about conjugation is that once you know the process, it's actually really easy to do. For example, this red is what we did last chapter. You had AR verbs, and that could be like preparar, to prepare something, or like practicar, to practice like a sport, or like an instrument or anything. You always take off the ending, AR, and then depending as to who you talk about, you put a new ending in. Sometimes it's 1 letter, sometimes it's a couple of letters, but you put something new in. So you had the endings of like oh, as, if you're talking about a person. This was if you're having like conversations with someone, and this one's about yourself, of course. Amos, if it's you plus other people. Ice or an just mean they. It's just that this is the Spain version that we don't necessarily ever really use, and then this is what we actually do use. So these were the endings we had last month. This time we're looking at these two, the green and the blue. If you notice, the endings look almost exactly the same. The O's are all exactly the same. They're just a different color, so it's the same ending. But what changes is like we had A's, and now we have E's instead of A's. That's all that you did. Why do we have E's instead of A's? Because an AR verb is keeping their A. An ER verb, like if it's to eat, comer, you are keeping the E instead. We end up learning the ER and the IR together because if you also notice, it's basically the same except for the nosotros and then also the vosotros, but since we end up not really using this one, it kind of doesn't matter that they're a little bit different because you don't really use them. But they are different for the nosotros. So when we do our lesson today, we're going to focus on kind of how these are pretty much the same, but then we'll remember why these two are a little bit different. So if you would like to take a little picture of this as well for yourself to keep with you, you totally can. And then I'm going to move us on to your little section right here. So pause if you want to, because if not, I'm going to move on. So for your charts, this is the way we usually see them. The other one was just like a long list of all the endings, but we're used to kind of having them in certain spots in the chart. So I kind of just showed them to you guys in the chart instead. These are the endings that come with ER verbs. We have a lot of ER verbs. Usually the most popular type of verb you come across is an AR verb, which is why we learned that chart first. And then we have ERs, which are like the second most frequently used. And then the ones that we don't use too much, obviously they exist, but we just don't use them a lot, are IR verbs. For the most part, you see O goes to O. ES, ES. E is an E. EN is an EN. Only thing that ends up changing are these two. I made them kind of like a yellowy beige to show you, look, these two are different. Any verb given to you, even if it's a word you don't remember, or like you've never even heard of ever before, if you know the process, the 2 steps that you do, you can still conjugate it. So we'll do a little sample one that is with the word that hopefully you guys remember. For example, we have comer. Sorry, I'm typing with one hand. So for comer, it means to eat. We know that. If you're talking about how like all these different people eat something, you just pretty much do the same process. You took off the ending, so you're going to take away the ER, and instead you're going to put one of these. So comer, if you're talking about yourself, it would end up being yo como, I eat. Like yo como desayuno, I eat breakfast. If you were talking about, or talking to someone, I should say, like if I'm asking you, hey, do you want to eat breakfast, or did you already eat breakfast? I could ask you, ¿tú comes desayuno? Do you eat breakfast? And then you can tell me like, no, I don't like it in the morning, or yes, do you have something to eat, right? But if I ask you, do you eat breakfast? And I'm talking to you, like, do you eat it? I would say comes. If I'm talking about someone, like mi mama, she doesn't like breakfast, she has like coffee and that's it. That's kind of what I do too. I can tell you about someone and say, no, mi mama no come desayuno. She doesn't eat breakfast. She drinks coffee instead. And then that's it. The second column has multiple peoples. So first one is about you and other people. So if it's like me and my dad who do eat breakfast, even though my mom doesn't, I would say nosotros, like mi papá y yo, my dad and I, comemos desayuno. My dad and I eat breakfast, even though we don't. But nosotros comemos desayuno. The last two are they. Again, we don't necessarily use this one, so actually in a lot of classes, you don't even like ever see this ending. You end up just getting like a blank space or maybe even like an X in this box instead, just because we don't use it, so a lot of people just choose not to teach it. I teach it to you guys because I think it's important to still know that it's an ending that exists, and if you ever hear someone like pronounce an ace ending in this case, you might go, what the heck is that? Who are they talking about? So it exists, we just don't really use it. So we're going to talk about the one that we do use. If it's a bunch of people, but not you, so like maybe my friends always had breakfast in the morning at school, I didn't, I just kind of hung out with them, I would say mis amigos comen desayuno. My friends eat breakfast. I just did not with them. So you have different ways you can constantly conjugate them, right? This is just what you do for ER verbs. Any ER verb, you would do the same thing that we just did here. You stick like the stem, the part that you don't change, the beginning part of the word, in front of whatever ending you need to use. So the same thing would end up happening once we did IR verbs. So any IR verb you get, although we only have had, I think, 2 of them so far, you would do the same thing. Whatever the verb is, you would take the beginning of it, and then you'd put the endings that you need, except now you have 2 that are a little bit different. And see, if the world was a perfect place and things were easier for us, you would say, kind of like how we looked at the little tiny chart that I made bigger right now, or a couple of minutes ago. If it's an AR verb, you use A's. If it's an ER verb, you put E's instead. You would say, if it's an IR verb, we should be putting I's instead, but we don't. So it's nice that you don't have to memorize all the I's again. Instead, it's just like, hey, the thing we literally use right now, we're keeping it exactly the same, except for nosotros. And technically this one, but we don't really use it, so it can kind of be ignored. But you change it for nosotros. So if it was like the verb escribir, which means to write, your end, or not your ending, sorry, your stem, your beginning of the word would be there we go, escribir, to write. You would do the same thing. Let me make this, there you go. Take away the IR, you would keep the escribe part, and you'd put it in front of all of these little endings. So it would be like, yo escribo would be here. Tu escribes. If you're telling you like, hey, do you write stuff in class? Like, do you guys do essays every week or whatever I'm asking about? One person, mi amigo, escribe en clase, like every single day. Maybe they have like timed writes. If it's a bunch of people, I'd say escriben. And then if it's me plus other people, escribimos. It's pronounced a tiny bit differently because you have an I. The words that we come across are mostly, like I said, going to be ERs or IRs, or sorry, ERs or ARs, but you just have a handful of IRs. I think you have one this chapter that is compartir, or to share. So we don't come across them too much, but luckily, since you don't use them a lot, you won't have to remember this emos too often. But it is important to still remember because you don't want to accidentally put an EMOS when it's now supposed to be an IMOS. We're going to keep practicing this in class, though. You have the charts basically just like this on page 3, no, not 3, sorry, page 159 in your textbook. You may take a look at them there as well. And then I'll kind of keep working with you guys and practicing it in class. I'll see you guys then. Adios.